I want to thank you, and it's for this huge opportunity to be back in Zagreb. And I would like to delve directly into the presentation so we have as much time as possible to listen, to hear these three fantastic and very different projects that the jury chose. And as the jury members and the process has already been explained a little bit briefly, what I wanted to do is to explain through a series of more experimental somehow researches and transformations of this building that I would say most of you know, which is the Barcelona Pavilion, how different people have kind of worked with it to discuss on topics that we all have in mind when designing, when doing architecture, when thinking about architecture, and which the jury also had in mind in different ways, and which become important in our times nowadays. But they have been important also throughout history. And maybe this photo that you're seeing over here from the MoMA exhibition in 1947 with the Barcelona Pavilion's photo there in black and white, so a white and black photograph of a white and black photo of the exhibition and of the building, was maybe the trigger point on the discussions and the debates that would come up on this building. This building was a myth back then because it did not exist any longer. It had only existed for 8 months. So there were a lot of theories, a lot of writings, a lot of drawings, some which were correct, some which were just inventions, some which were adaptations. And until its reconstruction in 1986, it was not possible to once again go and walk inside this space and to think immediately about how this space had to be activated and reactivated constantly. And so the EU Mies Awards was born at that point, as well as a series of programs to bring up these discussions on all these topics that I was speaking about. One of the things that we always have in mind has to do with history. We're maybe not that aware of the importance that maybe things that are happening, that are taking place right now, have on the way that we project, that we think about things and so on. But looking back, history also comes back, and how architecture plays a role in configuring the way architecture ends up being, because it embodies all the cultural, social, and political transformations of a certain moment, of a certain era, which was what Mies van der Rohe was also interested in. Here we're seeing some images of the opening of that pavilion, which was one of the elements of this expo, but there were all the German parts also designed by Lili Reich and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, representing Germany in the 1929 expo, which were much bigger than the pavilion and which were also part of this history. Time and context become important. 4 months before the 1929 crash of the stock exchange in New York was when the Barcelona Pavilion was opened. It was also when it was dismantled in 1930 in January. It was exactly 3 years before the Nazis became part of the German government. And at that time, there were already certain elements that maybe could make us think right now, but difficult to imagine or foresee back then, that we're also already kind of going in that direction towards the tragedy. Here we see, for example, how the Barcelona Pavilion could have looked like in 1929 when the words Alemania appeared. This is not something that we actually see. This is a transformation done by Dietrich Neumann, and the name of the company of the industrial stonemason, or the stone company that gave the stones to make the pavilion possible, was also inserted over there. But the words are in Spanish. It was a moment of a Spanish dictatorship, and together with a king and a queen, and only some months before, or a year and something before, this dictatorship had banned Catalan culture, Catalan language, and therefore the representation of the territory where this exhibition was taking place had disappeared. Even the symbols of the 4 bars of the Catalan flag, represented by those columns over there, were torn down. In terms of German history, and context. The person that, von Schnitzler, that you're seeing down there, who paid for much of the pavilion, this was during the Weimar Republic, was a highly conservative person from this aristocratic industrialist, who finally was also condemned because he was part of the Nazi regime, and although he only stayed in prison for hardly a year, he also participated of this huge tragedy. And so understanding also that probably the flags that were presented back then in 1929, representing this German country, this German nation, were the German flag on one side and the flag of the German Empire, the one that the Nazis would then use afterwards, and that even nowadays is also used by the neo-Nazis. So you're not seeing the next slide, but I am. Over here, but the idea was to speak about, not sure if something could be done. I see it correctly here on the screen. But the idea was to speak about how also social architecture emerges most of the time from social narratives, and from those smaller stories that are less well known or that are hardly known at all, and which make the exceptional possible. So from the ordinary to the extraordinary. So through a series of transformations of the pavilion, we can understand how there were a big group of people. So these series of different examples which have looked at those parts of the history of this building, the present one, but also the past one, the 1929 one, in which, for example, we reenacted or we spoke about the figure and the role of Lili Reich when she collaborated with her own separate studio together in the 20s with the studio of Mies van der Rohe in Berlin, and how also much of those different elements that they designed for the Expo, the 1929 Expo, are not very well known at all, other than the pavilion itself, and so that table presented all these other spaces. Or how the maintenance, we'll speak about it just a little bit afterwards, of the pavilion is absolutely necessary by the team of the pavilion, so that we see it as if it were absolutely new. Or the people that worked in one of the most difficult parts of the city of Barcelona still today, Sant Adrià de Besòs, which was where steel was transformed into all the structures that made the construction of the exhibition possible. And obviously, as you're seeing down there on the right side, there's the photo of the opening of the exhibition, so all the glory and the nice kind of celebrations that took place. But just behind what we could see, what people, visitors and so on saw, behind there were these shanty towns full of people that had immigrated to Barcelona because it was possible to work in the construction of all these different pavilions, infrastructures like the metro and so on, and which had been or have been for a very long time kind of not recognized. Another important element that we speak about or that we work with when this one's not working, but however, has to do with movement through the spaces. We have had several dance interventions, dancers and choreographers working with movement and the connection of the body with the spaces of the pavilion. And also, for example, understanding that in 1929, the black and white photo, what you see is the pavilion had no doors at all. It's not totally true because they had to add them because of security issues, but the idea was that this would be a totally open space. So Jordi Bernadó, some years ago, also took them away for a while. And speaking about time, about movement, this photograph, which was taken by Michael Vesely, and as one single shot during 365 days, but not 365 photographs, but instead it was a very slow taking or making of that photograph, and grasping only what stays there during time, which is the sunlight that comes out every morning from the same part, changing a little bit on the eastern side, some of the furniture, the elements, but people become ghosts or they kind of disappear as well. So one of the other elements that becomes essential has to do with materiality. The video that would be here is the one depicting that transformation of the pavilion in which it was totally covered with this kind of white elements, like kind of white stickers. That's not a Photoshop, it was an actual photograph by Adrià Goula, in which the materiality of the pavilion was totally transformed. It's not exactly that it disappeared, but suddenly the connections between the different materials, the decisions on which materials confront each other, disappeared totally, and the imagination had to kind of work to understand how those spaces could have different understandings or different meanings, and how important the way that they were chosen and put in their places became. Also changing the way that we related while we were there with this all covered in white with the space, how sound also changed, and then the typical kind of story that we always explain about these kids that were playing just there in front, and one of them relating the materiality of the pavilion covered in white to the materiality of Apple, and saying that this was probably the new Apple store in Barcelona because of the kind of similarities in that sense. The material that always kind of disappears and changes constantly is is water. And so there was this intervention by Ai Weiwei, which changed this material, the water, in both basins for milk and coffee. Another important topic has to do with light and how we work with it. There was this transformation by Iñaki Bonillas in the lantern, in the skylight or the light well over there, which is normally a light space, a space of light, that natural light comes inside. At night, it's artificial light, but he changed it to pink. The kind of lightness became heavier. But it also changed the color, and through the reflections that the pavilion has, and through the addition of Sanaa's, Kazuyo Sejima, and Ryu's Nishizawa's curved space within the rectangular space, all these reflections and all these experiences also started changing, as much as the proposal by Luftwerk, in which the points, the intersections of the joints, making points, making lines, but even the surfaces and so on, were exaggerated using the beamers that you're seeing over there. So this issue that for me became very important, of using travertine, which has more holes in the vertical elements than on the horizontal ones, and the travertine, so that the contrast between the black holes and the white surfaces becomes stronger, was reflected, has been reflected in several of the different experiments over there. We should also speak probably about smells or about sound. In this case, you've already probably heard about this Maggi pavilion. Maggi is this German company that prepares soups, and it was also present in front of the Barcelona pavilion, where it's reflected in 1929, and you could have free samples of soup. So probably, as several people have said, the Barcelona pavilion smelled of soup back then in 1929, and Muntadas, the artist that you're seeing over here, added smells to the pavilion. He added the smell of old, humid paper, the paper of an archive that had a very rough life in Berlin during World War II, where Lily Reich was able to save it and then send it to Chicago, from Chicago to New York. So this pavilion that did not exist other than in paper. And then another smell that people would find when entering the pavilion, which was of the brand new book, something that you just opened and smells totally as new. The issues about ecology about the importance of thinking on other species other than ourselves have also been part of the transformation of the pavilion, and in a very important way, when suddenly, finally, 3 years ago, it was possible to get rid of all the chemicals in the pond over there in the pavilion and bring back the plants that had originally already been there. We will probably see a 1929 photo pop out over there, in which, in a very subtle way, we see that there were water lilies and some other vertical plants already in the pavilion in 1929. This had not been possible because the new pavilion, the pavilion area where there's the water, is much more shallower, so it had been difficult to put plants, but finally we managed. And through a research project done by Centrala from Warsaw, but also with Kajo Rejsewicz, we just recently filled it up with tropical plants or plants from the Amazon to discuss and speak about the destruction of this huge forest, which is so necessary. But also the photo that's missing over there is of the reconstruction of the 8 columns that used to be in front of the pavilion, Ionic columns then, and which were rebuilt. Following a competition by Luis Martinez Santamaria, using oil drums, the oil drums that are used in the oil industry, explaining the importance that industry had in the 19th century, the importance that industry had in this 1929 exhibition, but also how this industry has been destroying our environment. Image and how we normally think that we will kind of see things, and the amount of information that we receive from photographs, from videos, from social media and so on, has also been something very strong and studied in the pavilion. The issue also of aesthetics, of beauty. In this case, the photos that we're seeing over here are this phantom Mies's rendered society that Andrés Jaque brought to the pavilion, understanding that underneath that platform of travertine, there's a huge basement where all the different elements that are not kind of useful anymore, pieces of broken stones or glass or doors or furniture, elements that are necessary to clean are hidden there. These parts, these smaller stories, which are not that much known, and which are the ones that allow us to have an image of things. And that we see as well, for example, in the photo that just appeared over there, on top of the other 1929 photo, in which Mies published the pavilion with certain things that were transformed, that were changed in the photo. It was photoshopped. The flags disappear, and the shadow casted by these 8 columns that used to be there in front also disappears. So explaining a story using image. The issues of gender have also taken space in the pavilion. In the video, in the bigger video, we see the typical red curtain, the velvet curtain, which is heavy, which is opaque, which does not allow for any transparency, which also recalls kings and queens and power, and how that was changed into that blue silkish curtain by Felix González Torres in 2021, which moved, which was transparent, and which would allow for other views and visions and imaginations on the possibilities that the pavilion brings. As much as what we have over here through the research by Terence Gower on the importance that the Raval, which is the neighborhood nearby the pavilion, had in that time in Barcelona, a place that still has some of that kind of decay atmosphere nowadays, already kind of very minimalized, but where a huge freedom for many, many decades was possible in the city, and possibly Mies van der Rohe that could have stayed in the hotel next to the cathedral, and if he ever walked to the pavilion, he would have had to cross this neighborhood of huge different people and different ways of using it. The issue or the topic also of domesticity, of housing, has been present by transforming the pavilion into one of the apartments of the Bordeaux, the transformation of the Bordeaux housing by Lacaton, Vassal, Drouot, and Hutin, by Ilka and Andreas Ruby, and through some other kind of transformations of the space, understanding that even if this was a pavilion of representation, it was very much connected to the Tugendhut house, which was being built at the same time, in that case, for a family to live, and probably the projects later on housing that Mies was to design in the United States. And of course, a place also to celebrate. A place where Pere Portabella in 1989 did a film which was called Warsaw Bridge, in which he already imagined all these people interested somehow in culture, meeting in the pavilion, speaking about whatever their businesses were about, with certain interests connected to culture, and understanding that the pavilion originally, as Ludwig Mies van der Rohe up there is saying, was something that arrived at a very late stage in the construction of the 1929 fair, when he was called only some months before the opening, 12 months before the opening, by the German Weimar Republic, asking him to design this space or this place representing Germany, nobody really actually knowing what a pavilion was supposed to be, and only receiving an answer on what he was supposed to do about using not too much glass. In the reconstruction, the pavilion, as we've seen, has a new use. It's a place of meeting, it's a place of discussion, it's a place where conversations like today's also take place. It was rebuilt at a time when Barcelona was very different from 1929 and very different from nowadays, and it is also a place where the award ceremony takes place, and that's what allows us to have the presentations that we'll have today possible, but also to, this one was important. But well, in any case, I leave it over here. But the discussions that the jury had on the topics that they considered important to highlight, and that the 40 works that you see upstairs represent, and that we are able to share today with the authors of 3 of these works. So thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to the presentation. Thank you.